For 9 years, Todd Collins told everyone the same story. The electrician, Paul Hayes, had argued with him over the final payment, packed up his tools, and stormed off the job site in 1999, never to be seen again. The police had no reason to doubt him, and Paul's disappearance became a cold case, a man who simply walked away from his life. But when a new family bought the long-abandoned house in 2008, their plans to finish the basement led them to a section of wall that wasn't on the blueprints. Behind it, covered in dust and cobwebs, sat a single spool of electrical wire, its yellow casing melted into a blackened, twisted mass. What secrets can a simple object hold after nearly a decade of silence? Let us know what you think might have happened in the comments as we unravel this chilling story. The year was 2008. For Gregory Hayes, the 9 years since his father's disappearance had felt like a lifetime. At 24, he had built a life for himself, but it was a life constructed on a foundation of unanswered questions. He worked as a draftsman for an architectural firm, a steady job that paid the bills but left him feeling hollow. Every blueprint he drew, with its precise lines and clear specifications, was a stark contrast to the blurry, undefined hole in his own past. His father, Paul Hayes, had been an electrician, a man who worked with his hands and understood the logical flow of currents and circuits, a man who, according to the official story, had simply vanished one Tuesday afternoon, leaving behind a 14-year-old son and a wife without so much as a goodbye. Gregory never believed it. The story the homeowner, Todd Collins, had told the police, a petty argument over a few $100s, never felt right. His father wasn't a man to run from his responsibilities, and he certainly wasn't a man to abandon his family over money. But with no evidence to the contrary, the police had closed the case, and the world had moved on. Gregory and his mother, Brenda, were left to navigate their grief in silence. Their shared loss became a wall between them. Brenda retreated into a fragile quietness, while Gregory's sorrow hardened into a quiet, simmering anger. The phone call came on a bright October afternoon. It was a Detective George from the local precinct, a name Gregory vaguely remembered from the early days of the investigation. The detective's voice was calm, professional, but it carried a weight that made the hairs on Gregory's arms stand up. He asked if Gregory could come down to a property on Sycamore Lane, on the outskirts of town. It was the Collins house, the house where his father was last seen. Driving there, Gregory felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The house stood on a large, overgrown lot, looking just as neglected as it had for the past 9 years. A sold sign was planted in the weeds out front. A pickup truck was parked in the driveway, and two people, a man and a woman, were standing on the porch talking to Detective George. They looked to be in their 30s, their faces a mixture of excitement and concern, the unmistakable look of new homeowners. Detective George introduced them as Albert and Deborah. They bought the place a couple of weeks ago, the detective explained. They're planning a full renovation. They found something in the basement you need to see. Albert led them into the house. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. In the living room, plastic sheets covered the floors and tools were scattered about. He pointed toward a dark staircase. "Down here," he said. The basement was damp and poorly lit. Most of it was open concrete, but along the far wall, a section of fresh drywall had been torn down, revealing a dark, shallow space behind it. It was a crawl space, maybe 3 feet deep, that didn't appear on any of the original house plans. Albert shone a heavy-duty flashlight into the opening. Deborah noticed the wall sounded hollow here, he explained. It wasn't on the blueprints the county gave us, so we decided to open it up. There, sitting in the center of the dusty space, was a spool of yellow electrical wire. But it wasn't clean and new. The plastic of the spool was warped and bubbled, and the bright yellow casing of the wire itself was melted and fused together in a grotesque, blackened clump. It looked like it had been subjected to intense, focused heat. Gregory stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. He recognized the brand, the gauge of the wire. It was the same kind his father had always used. "This was walled off?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Completely sealed," Deborah confirmed. "No door, no access panel. Whoever put that wall up didn't want anyone finding what was behind it." Detective George crouched down, examining the scene without touching anything. "The fire department confirmed there are scorch marks on the ceiling joists inside that space," he said, looking at Gregory. "There was a fire in there, a small one, but intense enough to do this." A fire, a hidden wall, a melted spool of wire. These weren't the remnants of a man who had simply walked away. This was something else entirely. For the first time in 9 years, Gregory felt the fog of uncertainty begin to lift, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was a clue. This was a starting point. This melted wire was a message from the past, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had to find out what it meant. His father hadn't just left. Something had happened to him in this house, and the proof was right there in that dark, forgotten space. The police officially reopened the case, but for Gregory, it was more than a case file. It was a personal mission. Detective George was thorough, but the department had limited resources to dedicate to a 9-year-old disappearance. Gregory knew that if he wanted real answers, he couldn't just wait. He started with the one name that had haunted him for years, Todd Collins. He spent his evenings at the public library, scrolling through old property records and archived news articles on the microfiche machine. He learned that Todd Collins had sold the house just 1 month after his father's disappearance, taking a significant loss on the sale. He had moved out of state to a small town in Ohio. The speed of the sale, the financial loss, it felt like a man running from something. He brought his findings to his mother. He took a photo of the melted wire on his phone and showed it to her one evening. Brenda stared at the image, her hand flying to her mouth. For years, she had avoided talking about Paul, as if speaking his name would make the loss too real. But seeing the picture broke through her wall of silence. "That man," she said, her voice trembling. "Todd Collins. Your father complained about him." Gregory leaned forward. "What did he say?" "He said the man was difficult," Brenda recalled, tears welling in her eyes. "He was cheap. He refused to pay for materials up front, insisted on buying them himself. Paul said he felt like Collins was always watching him, questioning every little thing. He told me the man gave him a bad feeling, that something was off." This was new. The original police report had only mentioned a final payment dispute, nothing about the ongoing tension. Did Dad say anything else? Anything specific about the work? Brenda shook her head. Just that the job was a headache. The Friday before he went missing, he came home frustrated. He said he'd found something wrong with the wiring Collins had tried to do himself, and that they had a big argument about it. A new piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about a final payment. It was about the work itself. Armed with this new information, Gregory called Detective George, who confirmed that this detail was never in the original witness statement from Todd Collins. It was enough to raise more red flags. The detective promised to try and track down Collins' current whereabouts for an official interview, but he warned Gregory to stay away. "Let us handle this, son. Don't go playing detective." But Gregory couldn't wait. He found a current address for a Todd Collins in Ohio that matched the age profile, a quiet street in a sleepy suburb. He told his boss he needed a few days off for a family emergency, and without telling his mother or the police, he got in his car and started driving. The 12-hour drive was fueled by coffee and a relentless stream of questions. What would he say? What did he hope to find? He just knew he had to look the man in the eye, the last man to see his father alive. He found the house, a small, modest bungalow with a neatly kept lawn. An older man was watering flowers on the porch. He was thinner now, his hair gray, but Gregory recognized him from the old photo in his father's case file. It was Todd Collins. Gregory parked down the street and watched for a while, his heart pounding. Then he took a deep breath and got out of the car. He decided on a cover story. He approached the porch, holding a notepad. "Mr. Collins?" he asked. Todd looked up, his eyes wary. "Yes?" "My name is Greg," he said, omitting his last name. "I'm a student at the local community college, doing a research paper on how small towns have changed over the last decade. I was told you used to live in my hometown in Pennsylvania. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about your time there." Todd seemed to relax slightly at the mention of a school project. "I suppose a few minutes wouldn't hurt," he said, gesturing to a porch chair. Gregory sat down, his hands clammy. He started with simple questions about the town, the community, the economy. Then, as casually as he could, he steered the conversation toward the house on Sycamore Lane. "I was looking at old property records," Gregory said, "and I saw you built a house out there. Must have been a lot of work." Todd's posture immediately stiffened. "It was a long time ago," he said curtly. "I'm just curious about the building process back then," Gregory pressed gently. "I heard you did some of the work yourself. The electrical, maybe?" The friendliness vanished from Todd's face. His eyes narrowed. "Who told you that? I hired professionals for all the important stuff. Hired an electrician. He was unreliable. Didn't finish the job." He was reciting the same story he told 9 years ago, but his voice was strained. His hands, resting on the arms of his chair, began to tremble. "Oh, I see," Gregory said, pushing his luck. "So, you didn't have any issues with the basement wiring then? No problems with inspections or anything?" That was the breaking point. Todd shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "I don't know what this is about, but I think you should leave," he snapped, his voice shaking with rage. "This is a ridiculous line of questioning for some school project. Get off my property. Now." As Gregory walked back to his car, Todd's hostile reaction echoed in his mind. It wasn't the reaction of a man annoyed by a student's questions. It was the reaction of a man with a dark secret, a secret that he was terrified would be exposed. Gregory now knew with absolute certainty that Todd Collins wasn't just a former homeowner. He was the key. The drive back to Pennsylvania was a blur. Gregory immediately went to Detective George and told him everything. Todd's violent reaction, the story his mother had shared about the faulty wiring. The detective listened intently, making notes. Todd's behavior was more than suspicious. It was probable cause. It gave the police enough justification to request a formal interview with him and even get a warrant to search his home in Ohio. While the wheels of justice began to slowly turn, Gregory was consumed by a single thought. His father was a man of habit and precision. He knew his dad kept detailed records of every job, materials, hours, payments, and notes. Where were those records? His mother had given the police all the paperwork from his father's home office 9 years ago. But what about the van? His dad's old work van, a rusty Ford Econoline, still sat behind the family garage, covered in a tarp. It hadn't been touched in years. His mother couldn't bear to sell it. Gregory spent a Saturday afternoon pulling everything out of it. Old tools, scraps of wire, dusty invoices. As he was clearing out the back, he felt a loose panel under the built-in shelving unit his father had installed. He pried it open with a screwdriver. Tucked inside was a small, hidden compartment. And inside the compartment was a worn, leather-bound work ledger. He flipped through the pages, his heart racing, until he found the last entry, dated October 1999. The client name was written in his father's familiar, neat script. Todd Collins. The entry detailed the hours worked and the materials used, but it was the notes scrawled in the margin that made Gregory's blood run cold. The first note read, "Collins DIY wiring in basement is a death trap. Multiple code violations. Main junction box behind drywall is sparking. This is a major fire hazard." A second note, dated 2 days later, read, "Confronted Collins about the faulty wiring. He refuses to let me fix it or report it. Says he'll handle it himself. I can't sign off on this job. It's not safe." This was it. The proof. The real reason for the argument. It wasn't about a few $100s. His father had discovered something dangerous, something that could have cost Todd Collins thousands in fines and repairs, and he was going to blow the whistle. At that exact moment, his phone rang. It was Detective George. "We got him, Gregory," the detective said, his voice grim. "The Ohio police brought him in for questioning. We presented him with the new evidence, your mother's statement about the argument. He's a tough nut to crack, but his story is full of holes. We also found something at his apartment, old building permits from 1999. He applied for an electrical permit for the Sycamore house, but it was denied after a failed initial inspection. He never reapplied." "I have something else," Gregory said, his voice shaking as he read the notes from the ledger to the detective. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That's the nail in the coffin," Detective George finally said. "Stay put. I'm on my way." With the discovery of Paul's ledger, Detective George had the final piece of leverage he needed. He flew to Ohio and confronted Todd Collins directly. Faced with the undeniable proof from Paul's own handwriting, the failed permit, and his own suspicious behavior, Todd's carefully constructed 9-year lie finally shattered. He confessed. The story that poured out was one of pride, anger, and panicked violence. Todd, trying to save money, had attempted to wire the basement himself, watching online tutorials and reading books. When the city inspector failed his work, he was humiliated and furious. He decided to finish the job himself and hide it behind drywall, hiring Paul Hayes for the final hookups, hoping the professional would just sign off on it. But Paul was too good at his job. He immediately spotted the dangerous amateur work, especially the sparking junction box that Todd had carelessly hidden. Paul had told Todd that he was ethically and legally bound to report it. The house was unsafe, a fire waiting to happen. An argument erupted in the basement. Todd, seeing his shortcuts and deception about to be exposed, flew into a rage. He grabbed a heavy pipe wrench from a nearby toolbox and struck Paul on the back of the head. In the terrifying silence that followed, Todd's panic set in. He dragged Paul's body to a far corner of the large, wooded property and buried him in a shallow grave. Then, an idea formed. He went back to the basement and used the faulty junction box his father had warned him about to intentionally start a small fire inside the crawlspace, hoping it would look like Paul's own faulty work had caused an accident. The fire fizzled out, but not before it melted the nearby spool of wire. In the days that followed, Todd hastily drywalled over the entrance to the crawlspace, hiding the evidence of the fire. A month later, he sold the house and fled the state, starting a new life built on a foundation of murder. Following the confession, police excavated the property on Sycamore Lane. They found Paul Hayes' remains exactly where Todd said they would be. The long, agonizing wait was over. A few weeks later, Gregory and his mother stood in a quiet cemetery, finally laying Paul to rest. The headstone was simple, engraved with his name, his dates, and the words, "A good man, a loving father." The cloud of abandonment that had defined Gregory's life for so long had finally dissipated. In its place was the profound sadness of the truth, but also the quiet relief of closure. He had not been left behind. His father had been taken from him. As the service concluded, Gregory stepped forward and placed a small object on the fresh earth in front of the headstone. It was a small, neat coil of new, clean yellow wire, a tribute to the dedicated electrician who had lost his life for doing his job with integrity. He had found the truth, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his father's legacy. Todd Collins chose to commit murder rather than face the financial and personal embarrassment of his faulty work being exposed. Do you believe a person's pride can be a stronger motivator than their conscience? Share your thoughts on this difficult question below. If these kinds of stories that search for truth resonate with you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We appreciate you being part of our community of curious minds.